did not forget the love offering. First service, I forgot the love offering, and I made a mental note to not forget the love offering. I just thought I prayed through the first offering. So I came up there early and realized, oh, that is the first offering. So I didn't forget this time. I definitely forgot first time, which, if you know me, is not at all surprising. I didn't write it down. I was in both of the meetings where we discussed having the love offering, and then when we decided to have the love offering, I got a text last night from Karen reminding me about the love offering, and I didn't write it down, so I forgot about the love offering. Second service, didn't forget. I just thought I forgot about the first offering. So, how's everyone doing today? Good morning. It's very windy outside. You don't need to worry about the wind. I can assure you this house is built on the rocks. I have seen the blueprints. The rocks are crumbling a little bit. Not to worry, we're going to fix that soon. This past year has been a year of transition for our congregation. We have experienced a lot of changes over the years. Just a few weeks ago, as part of our service, we ordained some new leaders. I was ordained as an elder. Jimmy was ordained as a deacon. Dave and Bob, who have both been deacons in the past, returned as deacons again. We also took a moment to recognize people who had been on leadership and who were stepping down from leadership. We're taking a time outside of a leadership role. Another big change that's in the works in the past few months has been finding a new preaching minister. We've been working to find a new preaching minister. And we haven't updated you on that until we updated you a little bit ago. We haven't updated you on that in a while. But we've been working nonstop on that. Anytime we get together for lunch or for a meeting, we talk about it. We're talking about, hey, what's going on? What's the next thing? We've been vetting candidates. We've been looking at resumes. We should show you some of them. One resume we got was just an email from a college kid. There wasn't even a document attached. It was just an email saying, I want that job, basically. And we're like, no, I think you're a little wet behind the ears. We're not ready for you yet. But we've been working continuously on this, and we have a candidate, and I don't know how much I'm allowed to say about the candidate, so I'm going to leave it on purpose. We have a candidate who I think is the person God intends for us. And he is very qualified. He is very skilled. We're very excited about him. And Stephen Curtis and I have loved sharing God's Word with you over the past few months. It's been a real blessing for us. But we're excited for whoever it is, if it's this candidate or if it's somebody else, we're excited for the person that God built for this position to arrive. And I know that some of you are even a little more excited than we are. A little too excited. They almost gave me an amen first service when I said that. They were really excited in the first service. But when God finally provides that person, which I think is going to be very soon, it's going to be another leadership change in our congregation. And so with all the leadership changes that's going on in our church, I think it's really important to ask ourselves, what is God's design for leadership in the church? What's his intention? What's his plan? And so today we're going to look at a story from the Bible about a massive leadership change. We're going to look at the story of Joshua's transition into leadership in Israel. And we're going to learn about God's design for leadership. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up to Joshua chapter 6, starting in verse 1. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with the king and all its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and the army will go up, everyone straight in. So Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord, have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it." And he ordered that the army advance, march around the city with the armed guard going ahead of it, ahead of the ark of the Lord. See, this story takes place just a little while after the death of Moses. And something you should know about Moses is, just to give you a little bit of backstory for Israel, what you should know about Moses is that he was one of, if not the, most influential leader in Israel's history. Moses led God's people through out of Egypt. Moses stood up to Pharaoh. Pharaoh was the most powerful man on earth. Ancient Egypt was the powerhouse. There was no one as powerful as Israel, and there was no one, or Egypt, and there was no one as powerful as the Pharaoh who ran Egypt. And Moses walked into his court, and he challenged them. He said, "Let my people go. Let God's people go." He challenged the Pharaoh. And then he led God's people through the Red Sea into the Promised Land. And when God's people were not able to enter into the Promised Land, he led them through the wilderness for 40 years. But Moses saved Israel from destruction. When God's people finally reached the Promised Land after leaving Egypt, they sent spies in, and 10 of the spies came back and said, it's not doable. We can't do this. We can't accomplish this goal. They're too giant. They're too big. They're too strong for us. And so Israel was afraid to follow God's plans. And so God initially what he was going to do, before he sent them into the wilderness, he was going to wipe all of them out. He was going to destroy them completely and start over with Moses' family. But Moses stood in between God and Israel and he said, "No, don't destroy your people." Moses stopped God from destroying Israel. He delivered the 10 Commandments and the law. He led them through the wilderness for 40 years. Moses was a big deal. And so after Moses dies, Joshua is appointed the new leader of Israel. And I guess you could say that Joshua has some pretty big shoes to fill. Pretty big sandals to fill. And the time had finally come to enter into the land that God had promised his people. Now, just because God had promised this land to Israel didn't mean that it was going to be smooth sailing. This isn't like buying a new house. Israel could just pull up in the U-Haul and start unloading the bunk beds. There was a people living in the Promised Land who God still had to deal with. So entering the Promised Land meant going to war. So from pretty much day one of his new job, Joshua had a lot to live up to because Moses was his opening act. And he had a lot of pressure because from his first responsibility was to lead Israel to war. And so God sends an angel to Joshua. And he tells him, is this messing with your head when I say your name much? So God sends an angel to Joshua to tell him to attack the city of Jericho. And there's only one problem with that. The city of Jericho was a fortress. It had a massive wall surrounding it. When I say a wall, I don't mean like a fence or even our walls, which are pretty sturdy. It had a massive wall around it. It was so big that people built their homes into the wall. A giant block housing. And so the angel tells Joshua, I want you to attack the city, but don't worry, I've worked out a plan for you. Here's the plan. Have the priests pick up the Ark of the Covenant, and you're going to march around the city. You're going to do that for 6 days. And on the 7th day, you're going to do it 7 times, and then everyone's going to blow their horns and shout. That's the whole plan. Yeah. I don't know. No, I'm not a vet. I've never served in the military, so my military strategy isn't, what it could be. But this seems like an unconventional approach to warfare. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. All of my knowledge of ancient military techniques comes from Lord of the Rings. But so maybe walking around in circles is like a normal way to attack places. But I'm pretty certain that it isn't. It seems like a really unusual, risky plan. Like if God had said, Zach, I want you to attack Jericho, I don't know, some catapults or something, like something. But God's plan doesn't include any of that. And as strange as his plan seems, when God tells Joshua to act, Joshua obeys. And for Joshua, obeying means leading God's people where God told him to go. So Joshua gathers the people of Israel together, and they begin to march towards Jericho, following God's plan. Not my plan, not their plan, God's plan. Because as crazy as his plan sounds to us, and probably to Joshua, Joshua knows that when a godly leader follows God's directions, you always end up where you're supposed to be. See, Joshua wasn't making the calls the shots. He wasn't making decisions. He wasn't saying, you know what, I have a great idea, we're going to walk in circles. It's going to work out great. That was God's design. And it probably seemed just as strange to Joshua as it did to us. But Israel had learned a long time ago that you trust God whenever he tells you to do something. And let's look at what happens here. Let's look what happens next in the story. Joshua chapter 6, starting in verse 8. When Joshua had spoken to the people, 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding. But Joshua had commanded the army, do not give a war cry, do not raise your voice, do not say a word until the day I tell you to. Shout, then shout. So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once, and then the army returned to the camp and spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests looked up at the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord, and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets kept sounding. So the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. One of the most fascinating parts of this story to me is the way that Israel responds to Joshua's leadership. These people had just spent 40 years wandering around the desert. 40 years. See, the story behind that 40 years is Moses led God's people to the I told you a little bit of this earlier. Moses led God's people to the promised land, and they refused to go in. They refused to take hold of the land that God had promised them. They doubted God's plan. They doubted God's provision. Oh, you're good. I'll say that's not mine this time. They doubted God's plan. They doubted God's provision. And so God sent them into the wilderness for 40 years. That isn't just a random number. That wasn't just because God likes the number 40. The plan, he sent them into the wilderness for 40 years because God wanted that entire older generation who had infected Israel with doubt to die. He wanted them to die off. They didn't get to enter into God's promised land. Everyone over 20 had to die before Israel was allowed to return. Those people who were afraid to follow God's plans didn't get to stay. They didn't get to experience God's provision. They spent 40 years wandering around the desert. A whole generation of their nation died. And you finally get to the promised land, and Joshua shows up. He says, we're marching towards the most fortified city in the world. Grab your trumpet. Can you imagine what was going through the heads of the Israelites? Yeah. Are you sure? If it was me, I'd think of that's a great plan, but here's this bow and arrow. Maybe I'll bring it along. I don't know. But Israel would have known that this was an unusual plan. They would have known that this was a weird plan. They would have known that this is not the way you take over a city, especially a fortress like Jericho. But Israel knew better, because they had learned this lesson hard. They knew that when God provides you a plan, you follow it. Even if it doesn't make sense to you. Even if it just seems like this is not a normal plan. It's not an ordinary plan. I don't see how this plan is going to work out. You follow God's leadership. So when Joshua tells them the plans, they don't challenge him. They don't argue him. They just follow the leader that God had provided. Because they knew that Joshua was following God. If they wanted to get where they wanted to be, they had to follow a godly leader. So they had faith that even though this plan was crazy, God was going to make it work. Israel had witnessed God do incredible things. They'd seen God send the plagues. That was an unusual thing to do. That was a unique approach to abolition. He sent the plagues and freed his people. He sent Moses and parted the Red Sea. He sent manna and quail from heaven. Israel had seen God do fascinating and unusual things to make his plans work for his people. So when Joshua comes to them and tells them that God's plan is to march around the city 7 times for 7 days, they know that God can make impossible things happen. As crazy as his plan seems, it's going to get us where God wants us to be. It makes me think of driving with the GPS. Have you guys ever been to St. Louis? Who's ever been to St. Louis? Lauren and I went to college in St. Louis, and the thing you need to know about St. Louis is that no matter where you're driving, it takes 30 minutes to get there. And the reason is that the entire city is laid out like a spider web. All the highways go around the outside of the city, like slowly getting smaller circles. And then the streets go straight through the city. So you could be on Elm Street, but still be on the opposite side of town because you need to be on the North Elm. And you're on the opposite side of the city. So it takes 30 minutes to get wherever you're going. So when we get in the car to go somewhere, or to meet up with friends, or to go on a date or something, we punch where we're going into GPS. And it always looks crazy to me. Like, it looks like a toddler was trying to draw their name. That's the route we were taking. It was, go this way. And so inevitably, I would always try to just go my own path. It's like, you know what, I know a better place. I know how to get there. And then we'd end up on some dead end in a neighborhood I've never been in before. We'd have to finally use the GPS, but we should from the beginning. And eventually, we have to use the GPS, and we end up where we're supposed to have been 20 minutes later than we would have liked to have gotten there. But if I had just trusted that the GPS's route was better than my own, that maybe the GPS knew what it was talking about, I would have saved myself a lot of time, and a lot of gas, and a lot of headaches. And a lot of side glances from my then fiance. Late. When I tried to do things my own way, it didn't work out. In the same way, when God's people tried to follow their own path, they ended up in the wilderness for 40 days. But when they trusted in the leader that God had given them, they were able to conquer the city of Jericho. Because even if the path seems winding, God's people follow God's leader. So let's finish out this story. Joshua chapter 6, verse 15. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest shouted and the trumpets blast, Joshua commanded the army, "Shout, for the Lord has given you this city. The city and all of it that is in it to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she had despised me," said. "But keep away from the devoted things, that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it." That's fine. We're going to skip that verse. So, God's people carry out this plan. This seemingly crazy plan. They follow God's leader. They march around the city 7 times. When they complete the last time, they shout, they blow their horns, and the walls come tumbling down. Remember that old Sunday school song? Josh talked about Jericho, Jericho. Cannot sing all that, that's right. And the walls came tumbling down. I almost played that VeggieTales song. Keep walking, but you won't knock down our walls. And they run into the city. The walls of Jericho fall. These massive fortress walls that people lived in fall. And they run into the city. They capture the city. They capture everything in it, everyone in it. They kill the Jerichites, I don't know what they're called. The people of Jericho. And they run to the city and they capture everything because God's people follow God's leader. And when God's people follow God's leader, it produces godly results. And one of those godly results that was produced because they followed God's leadership was that a woman named Rahab was spared. A woman who had helped the Israelite spies, her life was spared. She was an ancestor of Jesus. Jesus is an ancestor because God's people follow God's leadership, God's plan, God's greater plan came to fruition. You got, by the way, side note, do you think you have some rotten apples on your family tree? Jesus' great-grandma was a prostitute. 2 of them, actually. So, if you got some crazy people in your family, don't worry, things are moving up. A few generations down the road. See, this is God's design for leadership in the church. It's all about following God. God chooses leaders who follow Him. And let me tell you, church, we work hard. Your leadership works hard to understand where God is leading us. Whenever we make a decision, we pray about it hard and a lot. And we talk about it, we try to look at it from every angle, we try to think about it every way possible, and then we go where we think God is leading us. And God has chosen some smart, godly leaders in this congregation. Your elders, your deacons, your trustees, these people are blessings to our congregation. These people who are in leadership roles in this congregation, God has put them in this position because they have blessed us by doing so. And soon, hopefully very soon, God is going to provide us a preaching list. And He's going to take on another leadership transition as well. And when that happens, our role is to follow where that godly leader is taking us. It'll look different than it has before. It won't be something we're used to. It might not be something that we're familiar with. It might be leading us in a direction that we're not exactly comfortable with. But our responsibility is, like Israel, to follow the godly leader that God has provided us. To have faith that God's plan is taking us where we want to be. See, I think this last year, this time of transition, as difficult and as painful as it's been, I think this year has been a part of God's plan. I think these growing pains that we've been going through are a part of God's plan. I think it's all been about bringing us to the point where we are who God needs us to be before God finds the person He wants to lead us to where we want to go. And when that happens, when our new preaching minister or whoever that is, and not just the preaching minister, the rest of the leadership as well, our responsibility is to follow the godly leaders that God provides us. Sometimes the route that God leads us on is not going to be comfortable. But if we want to end up where we want to be, we have to follow God's leadership. I mean, look at the blessings that came through Israel following God's leadership. We're going to have an invitation here in a moment, but let's look at the blessings that came through God, or through Israel following God's leadership. Israel followed God's leadership, and they conquered Jericho. Sure, but that was the first step. They also cleared out all the kings, all the evil, wicked kings in the promised land. If you look at the back of the book of Joshua, there's this long list of kings, tons of them. Evil kings who God just threw aside. Powerful men who thought they ruled the world, who God just threw on the ground. Israel listened to God's leaders, and they took the promised land. And in that promised land, they built Jerusalem, the city where Jesus would teach, the city where the temple was built, the city where David lived. Jerusalem, they said they built, in Israel, the Promised Land, they built Bethlehem where Jesus was born, Capernaum where Jesus walked. The Jordan River was there where Jesus was baptized. God's plan isn't short term. God's plan isn't temporary. God's playing the long game. And so, by listening to God's leadership, Israel set up the world for the next step of God's plan, for Jesus to come. And we have faith that if we follow God's leadership and submitting to Jesus, that He'll be faithful again. That He will bless us just as He's blessed Israel. So we want to extend an opportunity and give an invitation. If you'd like to give your life to Jesus, if you'd like to receive the blessing that comes through being faithful and following Jesus, now's an opportunity to do so. But not just this opportunity as well. If you'd like to place your membership here, if you'd like to place your membership with our congregation and become a member of our church, this is also that opportunity as well. We're going to have a time of invitation here. And if you'd like to make either of those decisions,